In tonight's Spotlight, the mind-blowing, horrifying results of an investigation into the abuse of dairy cows. The group called Mercy for Animals took their hidden cameras into a New York dairy, and what they found will shock you. We warn you, this video is graphic and disturbing. The investigation took place at the Willett Dairy in Lock, New York, which reportedly supplies 400,000 gallons of milk to New York City. As you can see, the cows are in horribly overcrowded conditions with barely any room to move. Mercy for Animals says that's the least of the abuses. Sadly, workers can be observed on tape mistreating the cows. Listen to how they talk about what they're doing to these poor, defenseless animals.
I hear down the coal. I walked around behind him and I started kicking him in the balls. That's the fifth time. You're going to get the fist next time. Probably why I got arthritis big time.
From punching cows.
You should know we are not showing by any means the most graphic video. There are some practices so horrible we cannot show them to you on camera. Joining me now, Nathan Runkle, Executive Director for Mercy for Animals. Nathan, thanks for joining us. What abuses does Mercy for Animals say it uncovered at this dairy farm regarding cows' tails and horns?
Our investigation found that workers were taking hot irons and digging into the skulls of these animals to remove their horns and taking a sharp blade and cutting off the calves' tails through their skin, nerves, and tailbone without a single drop of painkillers. These animals were thrashing about, bellowing out in distress and in obvious pain, and we feel that this abuse must end.
Willett Dairy is one of the largest dairy suppliers in New York. The man who runs the dairy talked to ABC's Brian Ross. Let's listen to his side.
I'm disappointed because I think what they've done is they've picked out a few isolated incidents and they're trying to portray them as something that is malicious on our part.
Now, the dairy farm owner, as you just heard, says you selected a few isolated events. But in refusing to prosecute this case thus far, as I understand it, the DA's office reportedly is saying many of the actions shown on tape are commonly accepted practices. So it seems odd that they're both using different explanations. Now, as a result of this investigation, I understand there's now a bill being introduced into the New York legislature to ban the cutting off of a cow's tail, which is called tail docking. Tell us about that.
Well, California passed a similar law last year that would prohibit this cruel and unnecessary mutilation of animals. It's something that the American Veterinary Medical Association condemns as being cruel, and even many of the dairy industry's own organizations say that this is unnecessary. This is something that causes both acute and chronic pain to the animals, this tail docking, and we are hoping that the New York legislature will pass this bill prohibiting this cruel mutilation and sparing thousands of animals this cruelty.
And what are you doing vis-a-vis the horns?
The horns is something that is not addressed in this bill, but we hope that as people become more aware of it, that we'll see more movement in that area as well. There are no federal laws to protect farm animals from abuse, and that's one of the reasons why this abuse runs so rampant in the dairy industry. So we need more protection.
Farm animals killed for food every year in the U.S. Nathan, thank you.